In 1954, a 41-year-old man was found dead in his bed beside a half-eaten apple. The coroner called it suicide. His mother never believed it. Historians still argue about it today. The British government had convicted him as a criminal and chemically castrated him. What almost no one knew was that this same man may have done more to win the Second World War than any soldier who ever fired a shot. He broke the code that was said to be unbreakable. He dreamed up the machine you are watching this on, and he asked a question we are still trying to answer: can a machine think? His country buried what he did in secret for 30 years, then punished him for who he was. This is the story of Alan Turing. Alan Matheson Turing was born in London on the 23rd of June 1912. His father served in the Indian Civil Service, so Alan and his brother were left in England, raised by others, while their parents lived an ocean away. He was a strange, brilliant child. He taught himself to read in 3 weeks, and was drawn to numbers and chemistry before he was drawn to people. At 13 he was sent to Sherborne, a boarding school that prized Latin and Greek, and had little patience for a boy obsessed with science. On his very first day, a national rail strike shut down the trains. Rather than miss it, the 13-year-old rode a bicycle 60 miles across the country, alone, sleeping overnight at an inn. His teachers were unimpressed. One headmaster wrote that if he was going to be a scientific specialist, he was wasting his time at a public school. But by 16 he was reading Einstein for pleasure and quietly extending the great man's reasoning in his own notes. Then, in the 6th form, he met someone who changed everything. His name was Christopher Morcom. Christopher was a year older, gifted, precise, easy with people in all the ways Alan was not. They shared the same hunger for science, the same love of the stars. They passed notes on math problems and watched the night sky together. For Alan, shy and solitary, it was the first true meeting of minds. It was also, though he could never say it, his first love. In the winter of 1930, Christopher fell suddenly ill. Years earlier he had drunk infected cow's milk and contracted bovine tuberculosis. Now it took him. On the 13th of February 1930, Christopher Morcom died. He was 18. Alan was shattered. He wrote to Christopher's mother that he was sure he could never find anywhere another companion so brilliant and yet so charming and unconceited. And in his grief, a teenage boy began to circle the question that would haunt his entire life. What is a mind? When the body dies, where does the thinking go? Could a mind exist apart from the flesh that carried it? He would spend the rest of his life chasing that question, into mathematics, into machines, and into a new idea of what thinking even is. In 1931, Turing went up to King's College, Cambridge, to study mathematics. King's was liberal, tolerant, a rare place where a mind like his could breathe. He graduated with first-class honours, and in 1935, at just 22, he was elected a Fellow of the College. Then a set of lectures set his imagination alight. The great mathematician David Hilbert had posed a challenge. Is there some definite mechanical procedure that could decide whether any mathematical statement is true? To answer it, Turing did something no one had done. He imagined a machine. Picture the simplest device you can. An endless paper tape divided into squares. A head that can read one symbol, write a symbol, and move left or right, and a small table of rules telling it what to do next. That is all. No screen, no keyboard, nothing but a tape and a set of instructions. Turing showed that this stripped-down gadget could carry out any calculation a human being could do by following fixed rules. It captured the very essence of computation. Then he took the idea one step further, into genius. He proved you could build a single machine that, fed the description of any other machine, could imitate it perfectly. One universal machine that could become any machine, just by changing what you feed it. That is the blueprint of every computer that has ever existed. One piece of hardware running any software you give it. It was 1936. He was 23 years old, and he had just invented the theory of the computer, a decade before anyone built one. In the very same paper, he proved something humbling, that there are problems no machine can ever solve, limits that no amount of computing power will cross. He had defined the power of computation and drawn its outer edge in a single stroke. The idea was so new that another logician, Alonzo Church in America, had answered Hilbert's question just months before by a completely different path. So Turing sailed to Princeton to study under Church himself. It was, at that moment, the center of the mathematical universe. Down the same corridors walked John von Neumann, Kurt Gödel, and Albert Einstein. Turing earned his doctorate there, but he also did something with his hands. In a machine shop he began building an electromechanical cipher machine, winding the relay coils himself. The abstract theorist was becoming an engineer of secret machines, a skill he would soon need more than anyone could have guessed. Von Neumann was so impressed he offered Turing a job in America. Turing said no. In the summer of 1938, with war clouds gathering over Europe, he went home to England. He already knew where he would be needed. On the day after Britain declared war, Alan Turing reported to a Victorian mansion in the countryside called Bletchley Park. Behind its gates, the government had gathered its codebreakers into wooden huts and given them an impossible task. They had to break Enigma. Enigma was the cipher machine the German military used for almost everything, and it was considered unbreakable. It looked like a typewriter, but inside were rotating wheels and a plug board that scrambled every letter through a maze of electrical paths. Press the same key twice, and you got two different letters. The wiring changed with every keystroke. The number of possible settings was almost beyond imagining. More than 150 million combinations. To put that in perspective, if you tested one setting every second, you would still be working long after the sun burned out, and the Germans changed those settings every single day. At midnight, whatever you had cracked was gone. Every morning, the codebreakers began again from nothing, racing a clock that reset before they could ever finish. But the machine had one flaw, buried in its own cleverness. Because of the way the current flowed back through the wheels, a letter could never be enciphered as itself. An A would never come out as an A. It sounds trivial. It was the crack in the wall, and Turing drove a wedge into it. But Britain was not starting from nothing, and this part of the story is too often left out. Years earlier, Polish mathematicians had broken Enigma first. A brilliant young cryptologist named Marian Rejewski had reconstructed the machine's inner wiring using pure mathematics and built an early code-breaking device the Poles called the Bombe. Weeks before the war, in a forest outside Warsaw, the Poles handed the British and French everything they had: their methods, their machines, their head start. Turing took that foundation, and when the Germans changed their procedures and made the Polish method obsolete, he built something new. He designed a machine of his own. The British called it the Bombe. Instead of relying on German mistakes, it worked from cribs. Small pieces of text the codebreakers could guess would appear in a message, a weather report, a phrase like "nothing to report." The bomb raced through the possible settings, using logic to throw out the millions that were impossible and close in on the few that were left. A fellow codebreaker, Gordon Welchman, added a crucial refinement called the diagonal board that made the machine dramatically faster. The first bomb began turning in the spring of 1940. It was the size of a wardrobe packed with rotating drums, and it made a noise like a room full of knitting needles. Soon there were hundreds of them, tended day and night, mostly by young women of the Women's Royal Naval Service. They worked in shifts around the clock, in heat and noise and absolute secrecy, forbidden to tell anyone, even their families, what they did. Many of them carried that silence to their graves. And at the end of the process, a setting would emerge. The day's key. The door swinging open. German orders, submarine positions, entire battle plans, read in London sometimes before the men they were sent to reached them. The unbreakable code was breaking, but the hardest target of all was the sea. Turing was put in charge of Hut 8, the section attacking the German Navy's Enigma. The Navy was disciplined. Its version of Enigma used stricter rules and extra wheels. It was by far the toughest nut at Bletchley, and breaking it was a matter of life and death because of the U-boats. Across the Atlantic, Britain was being strangled. Everything the island needed, food, fuel, weapons, came by ship, in vast convoys crossing from America and Canada. And beneath the waves, packs of German submarines were sinking those ships faster than they could be built. They hunted in groups the Germans called wolf packs, shadowing a convoy by day, striking together in the dark. For the merchant sailors there was no armour and nowhere to run. A torpedo in the night and a ship of men was simply gone. Tens of thousands died in that cold water over the course of the war. Winston Churchill would later admit that the only thing that ever truly frightened him during the war was the U-boat peril. If the Atlantic lifeline was cut, Britain would starve, and the war in the West could be lost before it began. To find the U-boats, Hut 8 had to read the Navy's messages. Turing invented a method he called Ban-Barismus, a way of using probability to narrow the odds and spare his precious machines. He was, in effect, doing modern statistics years before. It had a name, measuring evidence in units he invented himself. But mathematics alone was not enough. Sometimes the code books had to be seized by hand, in blood. British sailors boarded sinking German vessels to snatch the code sheets before the sea swallowed them. In one raid, as a captured U-boat went down, 2 British sailors, Colin Grazier and Tommy Brooks, drowned carrying the code books out. Their sacrifice helped Bletchley back into the naval cipher. And then, in early 1942, disaster. The U-boat switched to a new Enigma with a 4th wheel. Hut 8 went blind. For most of a year, the codebreakers could not read the U-boat traffic, and in that black stretch, the sinkings soared. Only late in 1942, with fresh captured codebooks and new machines, did the light come back on. When it did, the effect was decisive. Knowing where the wolf packs were lurking, the Admiralty could steer entire convoys around them. In the spring of 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic turned. The hunters became the hunted. Turing's code breaking did not win that battle alone. Radar, air cover, and sheer courage all played their part. But the man who ran Hut 8 had helped keep Britain alive. The genius inside Hut 8 was, to his colleagues, a gentle eccentric. In June, when hay fever struck, he cycled to work wearing a gas mask to keep out the pollen. He chained his tea mug to a radiator so no one could steal it. Fearing invasion, he converted his savings into silver ingots, buried them in the woods, and then would never find them again. And in 1941, he fell into a genuine friendship with a fellow codebreaker, a gifted mathematician named Joan Clark. He proposed marriage. She accepted. Then, honest to a fault, he told her he was homosexual. She was unshaken, but he could not go through with it and broke off the engagement. In 1942, at the height of the U-boat war, Turing crossed that same deadly Atlantic himself to share Bletchley's secrets with American codebreakers. The theorist who imagined the universal machine was now the trusted link between 2 nations fighting for their lives. When the war ended, Alan Turing had helped save his country, and no one was allowed to know it. Everything he had done at Bletchley was locked away under the Official Secrets Act. It would stay secret for 30 years. So he turned back to the machine he had imagined on paper in 1936, and set out to build it for real. At the National Physical Laboratory, he designed one of the first complete plans for a stored program computer, a machine that kept its instructions in memory, just like the phone in your hand. It was brilliant and ahead of its time. But bound by secrecy, he could not even tell his bosses that he had already seen such machines work during the war. The project stalled. Frustrated, he moved to the University of Manchester, where real computers were finally flickering to life. He did not build the first machine there, but he became the mind that taught it to work, writing its programming manual and shaping how it thought. And then, in 1950, he published a paper that would echo for the rest of the century. He asked the simple, staggering question, can machines think? He decided the question, as asked, was almost meaningless, and replaced it with a game. Put a human and a machine in separate rooms. Let a judge send written questions to both, and try to tell which is which. If the machine can answer so well that the judge cannot reliably tell it from the human, then on what grounds do we deny that it is thinking? We call it the Turing test. It is still, 70 years later, the question at the heart of artificial intelligence. And he went further. He worked through the objections one by one, the ones people still raise today, that a machine could never be creative, never be conscious, never do anything truly original, only what we told it to do. He took each of them seriously and answered them, decades before there was a machine worth arguing about. He even predicted that one day machines would learn like children, taught rather than simply programmed. He guessed that by the year 2000 a computer might fool a human questioner often enough that we would stop insisting, machines cannot think. He was describing, in 1950, the world we are only now living in, and his mind never stopped ranging. In one of his last works, he turned to biology and asked why a tiger has stripes and a leopard has spots. He showed, with mathematics, how patterns can arise on their own from a smooth, featureless start, an idea decades ahead of its time that scientists still use today. He was right again, and again too early, but the man who had done so much, in public, was almost unknown. The world knew nothing of Enigma, nothing of Hut 8. His greatest work was a secret he was forbidden to speak of, and in 1952 that private life he had guarded so carefully was pried open. His home in Manchester was burgled by an acquaintance of a young man Turing had been seeing. When he reported the break-in to the police, Turing, honest as ever, told them the truth about the relationship. In doing so, he confessed to a crime. For in Britain in 1952, sex between men was illegal. It was called gross indecency, the very same law that had jailed Oscar Wilde half a century before. Alan Turing, who had helped save the nation, was arrested and put on trial. He was given a choice, prison or chemical castration. To keep his freedom and his work, he chose the injections, a course of synthetic hormones meant to strip away his desire. They changed his body. They humiliated a proud and private man. And there was more. His conviction cost him his security clearance. In the paranoid chill of the Cold War, a gay man was treated as a security risk, and the codebreaker who had guarded Britain's greatest secrets was quietly pushed out into the cold. On the 8th of June 1954, Alan Turing's housekeeper found him dead in his bed. He was 41. The cause was cyanide poisoning. Beside him lay a half-eaten apple. The inquest ruled it suicide. A mind, the coroner said, disturbed. And for decades that was the story. The persecuted genius taking a bite from a poisoned apple, ending his own life. But the truth is not so tidy. Here is what is often left out. The apple was never actually tested for cyanide. Turing kept cyanide in a tiny room off his bedroom for his own electroplating experiments. The fumes alone could kill. In the days before he died, he seemed, by many accounts, in good spirits. He had accepted a party invitation. He had left a to-do list for the week ahead. He left no note. Some historians, like Andrew Hodges, read it as a careful, deliberate suicide. Others, like the scholar Jack Copeland, argue the evidence does not support that verdict at all, that it may well have been a tragic accident. His mother went to her grave insisting it was. The honest answer is that we do not know how Alan Turing died, and perhaps we never will. For years after his death, the world still did not know what he had done. Only in the 1970s did the secret of Bletchley Park begin to come out, and the scale of his wartime work finally emerge from the dark. Slowly, the truth reassembled itself. The theory of the computer, the breaking of Enigma, the founding of artificial intelligence, all the work of one man, dead before he was 50 and once branded a criminal. In 2009, after a public campaign, the British Prime Minister issued a formal apology, saying Turing deserved so much better. In 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted him a rare royal pardon, and a law that followed in his name pardoned tens of thousands of other men, convicted, as he was, simply for who they loved. In 2021, his face was placed on the £50 note, carried now in the pockets of the country that once condemned him. The highest prize in computing bears his name, the closest thing his field has to a Nobel. There is a statue of him in Manchester, sitting on a bench, holding an apple. And at Bletchley Park, where he did the work no one was allowed to speak of, visitors now walk through the huts in their thousands. It is worth sitting for a moment with what was lost. He died at 41. He had already given the world the theory of the computer, the breaking of Enigma, and the founding question of artificial intelligence. We will never know what the next 30 years of that mind would have produced. Every time a phone unlocks at your voice, every time a machine answers a question, every time we ask whether a computer can truly think, we are living inside Alan Turing's imagination. He helped win a war his country could not admit he fought. He drew the blueprint of the modern world, then was punished for the truth of his own heart. Alan Turing. The man who knew what machines could become long before the rest of us were ready to listen,